Good morning, everybody. So I will be talking about the gaps in evidence for vehicle design for road safety as we learned from the evidence gap map. And just to tell you up front, I will be arguing two things. First, that the current policy dialogue on vehicle technology neglects the most important issues in low and middle income countries. This is a mistake because the experience of high income countries strongly suggests that vehicle design is the most important pillar of road safety. So those are the two arguments I'll be making. But let me preface that by pointing out that this is the current trend in road traffic deaths globally. We have 1.35 million deaths every year. This has largely remained stable at a high level. This estimate is from the 2018 WHO Global Status Report on Road Safety. We've had a ton of action on road safety, which started off with the 2004 WHO report on road traffic injury and prevention, after which there was a series of UN resolutions. Eventually we had a decade of action, 2011 to 2020, and then a lot of activity in that decade, a sustainable development goal, target 3.6 for road safety, more resolutions, and that brings us to today. And the question really is, has this worked? So you can see over here that the target was to reduce road traffic deaths in the decade of action by 50%. And to me it seems that there is no change in trend over this period. It just seems like road traffic deaths are stable at a high level, or some of you might see it as a rising trend. That's not what we are being told. What we are being told as part of this ministerial meeting is that we've had partial success. So here is the quote from the Academic Advisory Committee of the 2020 ministerial meeting. In 2011, road traffic deaths were expected to reach 1.9 million by 2020 if no action was taken. The ambition was to stabilize and then reduce deaths. The ambition of stabilizing the trend of global deaths has been met, but reducing by half has not been met. I don't think that that's true. I don't think there's any part of this trend that suggests that road traffic deaths would have gone up to the way I've shown, because that's the claim. So the reality is that the people who say these things are lying to us. And it's very important for us to call this out, because otherwise for the next 10 years we're going to do the exact same stuff that we've been doing before. I want to show you what success would look like, and this is what success looks like. So this is the rich countries of the world, the OECD countries, and you can see the reversal in trend that happens around 1970. You see traffic deaths are increasing before, they're declining afterwards. This is the trend we are looking for, and we are not seeing it. The question then is, what happened in these countries that made this succeed? And the short answer to that question is that these countries established regulatory agencies, gave them funding, and those regulatory agencies ushered in an era of evidence-based interventions. Which interventions work the most? There's a ton of evidence that points to car design being the most important intervention that has worked. So the main things that the US National Highway Traffic Safety Administration regulated after they came into existence was car design, primarily for occupant safety, but car design regulation was their main thing that they did once they came into existence. And the evidence suggests that that has been extremely successful in reducing risk on the roads. So this is analysis by Chuck Kahane, who looked at all the activities that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in the US did, starting in the 1960s, and what has been the effectiveness of it. And what you see in blue is the effect of vehicle design and what that did to road traffic risk. What you see in red is everything else, and what you see is that by 2012, the effect of vehicle design is equivalent to everything else. So this is telling you that vehicle design matters as much as everything else. When you regulate for vehicle safety and improve your vehicle technologies, you get such a huge payoff from it. So I would argue that vehicle safety is the most important pillar of road safety, based on the history of countries that have successfully managed to reduce road traffic crashes. This history suggests that there should be a ton of proven technologies, some of which are listed over here. So I'm calling these tried and tested technologies. I've also included some emerging technologies, but you'd recognize these right away: seatbelts, airbags, child safety seats, and so on. The emerging technologies are automatic emergency braking, which is also not emerging in the sense that there's already evidence of whether it works or not. For these technologies, there's extensive literature on evaluating their effectiveness that already exists. Most of them are supported by strong systematic reviews. And this is important from the perspective of the evidence gap map, in the sense that for these technologies, we didn't think that we wanted to be spending our effort trying to identify whether the evidence exists, because it's already well documented in the road safety community. So we have not looked at car design technologies that affect car occupants. We excluded that for that reason. These technologies are ubiquitous in cars sold in the US, Europe, and most high-income countries, and UN regulations aim to encourage their availability in low and middle-income countries. The question of how much would it matter if these vehicle technologies were widely available in low and middle-income countries, we tried to answer that question for one region, the Latin American region. What we did was we looked at the evidence that exists on the effectiveness of these tried and tested technologies and asked the question of how much would deaths reduce in Latin America if the same technologies were applied to the crash environments that exist in Latin American countries. And what we found was a 28% reduction in deaths in Latin America. I should just add that here I'm including motorcycle ABS, which is a relatively new technology and has a big effect on motorcyclist deaths, as you can see on the graph there. The important thing to note is that even after including motorcycle ABS, the gains in Latin America, 28%, which is very good, but it's much smaller than the gains that are described for the US. The reason for that is that most of the technologies that exist focus on occupants. So here, the technologies listed are actually color-coded. The technologies are in red are the ones that focus solely on occupants. The technologies in blue are the ones that apply to both occupants but also have effects on pedestrian safety. And the last one here, vehicle front-end design, is primarily for pedestrians. But you can just see that the list in red is much, much longer. It makes sense that rich countries focused on occupant technologies, because vehicle occupants are the ones that were dying in these countries. So here you can see that traffic deaths in the US currently, 2/3 are vehicle occupants. So it makes sense that they're trying to protect the vehicle occupants as their first matter of interest. But if you look in Latin America, where we were doing the work, as well as the global picture, only 1/3 of deaths are vehicle occupants. And so the point here is that the tried and tested technologies are mostly effective for vehicle occupants, and most victims in low and middle income countries and globally are outside cars, which brings us to the evidence gap map, that we excluded vehicle occupants, car occupants primarily, and focused only on technologies that protect people outside cars. And so here is what we found. So you've seen this matrix a few times before, so you know what you're looking for. One thing you might remember is that when Geetam was showing these numbers, the numbers were much bigger in the matrix. So these numbers are much smaller than what we saw for infrastructure. So the numbers of publications identified in the evidence gap map. What I'm comparing over here is poor countries versus rich countries, and the thing that you see is that almost all the evidence is from rich countries in green, which is not surprising, which is what you expected to see. There was actually only one study in the mix, and that is a study on helmet use in Cambodia for kids on bicycles and on motorcycles. So that's the only study from a developing country. So the conclusion is that there is no research and evaluation of vehicle design happening in low and middle income countries. That may not be a bad thing if if the high income countries were doing the right evaluations for things that mattered for low and middle income countries. So let's look at what has been looked at in the high income countries studies that have been done. So here I'm going to now describe for each of these vehicle types what has been studied. The matrix now shows impact evaluation studies in yellow and systematic reviews in green. And here is a summary of what is actually in these papers for these different road user groups. So technologies associated with bicycles, the EGM finds all the studies are on helmets. So there is nothing else about bicycle safety that's included under current impact evaluations. For motorcycles, most studies are on helmet use. But importantly, there's studies on motorcycle ABS. I think most of you would know how effective motorcycle ABS is, so that's established in these studies. There's also one study on conspicuity of motorcycles and 2 studies on daytime running lights, but there are no other technologies that have been evaluated. Bus and truck, daytime running lights, general safety and conspicuity. Car technologies, there's more, and important ones. So remember, we are only talking about car technologies that affect road users outside cars. So vehicle front-end design for pedestrian safety, there is some literature on it. Automatic emergency braking, there is some literature on it. Electronic stability control and what that does for pedestrian safety and other road users, there is some literature. What I now want to do is explain what is missing in this literature. And I want to start by talking about vehicle front-end design for pedestrian safety. So importantly, the evidence gap map finds no evaluations of bus truck front design. Notice that the proposed UN regulations on front-end design of cars for pedestrian safety only apply to cars. You can see over here what proportion of pedestrians are hit by cars. And you can see that in high-income countries, in the US, 90% of all pedestrians who die on the roads were actually hit by cars. So it would make sense for the US to be regulating front ends of cars. The US is actually not doing it yet. There is an expectation that the US would regulate. But it's in general true that most pedestrians in high-income countries are struck by cars. However, in low and middle income countries, the picture is dramatically different. In fact, if you look at India, only 20% of pedestrians who die on the streets were hit by cars. About 50%, more than 50%, were hit by trucks and buses. And we're doing nothing to regulate the truck and bus runs. The suggestion that we should be doing something about truck and bus runs is not new, it's not something I'm just coming up with. There's papers going back to early 1990s describing interventions for bus and truck fronts. Essentially the same thing that we're talking about cars should apply to bus and truck fronts. So, however, none of these technologies have been field tested and they're receiving no attention in the current policy and research discussions. The second thing I want to point out is, as Dinesh mentioned, there's a ton of indigenous vehicles that are very commonly used in low and middle income countries around the world. So auto rickshaws and tempos in India, tuk-tuks, jeepneys, e-rickshaws, and so on. We are all very familiar with these vehicles. But there's no conversation about what we're doing about safety in the current policy debate and dialogue that's happening. The only way I can imagine thinking about it currently is through the NCAP lens, which would involve crashworthiness conversations about these vehicles, but that is largely meaningless because crashworthiness conversations should apply to vehicles that move as fast as cars do. And most of these vehicles are really sluggish vehicles. How to regulate them is not something we are talking about. I don't know what the answer to that question would be, but we're not talking about it very coherently or at all for that matter. Again, just like bus and truck fronts, there's a ton of literature going back 20 plus years on how we should be thinking about design of these vehicles. And there's simple solutions that can be offered that are in this literature. These solutions include removing sharp objects from inside these vehicles, putting padding, ensuring that they don't roll over, so the rollover stability of these vehicles, ensuring that the people inside these vehicles remain inside these vehicles in a crash through structural design of the vehicles or through using seat belts. But again, the topic receives no current attention. By the way, the papers, you'll see, these are the first paper I'm a co-author, which I did as a student project working with Dinesh Mohan, and the other papers are also from Dinesh Mohan, and the papers I showed you from the truck front work is also from Dinesh. My point is that there was a ton of really good engineering work happening in India, and it's amazing not to see any of it being discussed. When we talk about vehicle design, we're only talking about NCAPs, and that's actually a very small slice of the problem. Moving beyond indigenous vehicles, there's actually a wide spectrum of issues that are unique to unique settings in low and middle income countries. And I'll just give you a few examples of these, and I'm sure many of you have seen many other examples. So for example, in the graph I showed you before of pedestrians and the vehicles they were struck by, in India, 20% of pedestrians who die are struck by motorcycles. And we don't know what the design solution for that should be. Similarly, it's very common for people in large wedding parties to be transported in the back of agricultural tractor trailers. And we aren't talking about design solutions to that problem. Flowing garments, like women wearing saris sitting on motorcycles and the sari getting caught in the rear wheel. It's a problem, we aren't talking about it very much, and so on. The thing is, we need research for this. We need epidemiological research to say whether these issues are a problem in our countries. We need engineering research then to develop solutions for them, and then we need to be evaluating, we need to do field tests and evaluate whether those interventions are actually working. And then once we know they are working, we need a mechanism for scaling these up either through regulation or through consumer information like NCAPs to ensure that these technologies are everywhere. So I'll conclude by saying that my main argument was that vehicle design is the most important pillar of road safety, because if you look at the history of high-income countries, vehicle design was what mattered the most. There's a ton of tried and tested technologies that comes out of the history of high-income countries regulating cars. These need to be promulgated as the UN regulations and the NCAPs are trying to do, so that's a really important thing that must happen. However, this is just missing a very large number of things that matter for low and middle income countries, and that can largely be addressed through new research. It's a shame that's not been happening. Thank you.